Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Most of the rest of the world is a jungle, and the jungle could invade the garden. These remarks were made by Joseph Boyle in 2022 during his tenure as High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy and Vice President of the European Commission. They are emblematic of the resurgence of old nationalistic and racially hierarchical themes that have reemerged in America and Europe. These ideas are often loudly pronounced by conservative and alt-right groups who do not bother with such polite wording. The unedited quote from Boyle goes, "Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works. It is the best combination of political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion that mankind has been able to build. The three things together. And here, Bruges is perhaps a good representation of beautiful things, intellectual life, and well being. The rest of the world, and you know this very well, Frederica, is not exactly a garden. Most of the rest of the world is a jungle, and the jungle could invade the garden. The gardeners should take care of it, but they will not protect the garden by building walls. A nice small garden surrounded by high walls in order to prevent the jungle from coming in is not going to be a solution, because the jungle has a strong growth capacity and the wall will never be high enough in order to protect the garden. The gardeners have to go to the jungle. Europeans have to be much more engaged with the rest of the world. Otherwise, the rest of the world will invade us by different ways and means. Yes, this is my most important message. We have to be much more engaged with the rest of the world. We are the privileged people. We build a combination of these three things: political freedom, economic prosperity, and social cohesion. And we cannot pretend to survive as an exception. It has to be a way of supporting the others facing the big challenges of our time. The initial description of Europe as a garden establishes a false sense of primacy for Europe, and by extension for Europeans. It places Europe at the pinnacle of human civilization, and by that logic, other civilizations must be inferior in some way. It reinforces this false social hierarchy by comparing the rest of the world to a jungle, a term heavy with a long history of use in racially derisive commentary. The false idea that Europe was a pinnacle of human achievement and a driving force in bringing those gifts to the rest of the world far predates the founding of America. As far back as ancient Greek writings, we see concepts of hierarchy in society. Though the modern concept of race would be developed later, the natural differences between types of humans were frequently discussed in ancient Greek writings and used to justify a social order in which a few were elevated and others, the many, oppressed. In medieval societies, religion became largely the basis for why some groups were considered lesser than others. The idea of Christians civilizing supposedly barbaric pagans was a driving theme and an excuse for the attacks on and enslavement of others. However, these themes would be expanded on and given explicitly racial tones over time. The period of European history known as the Great Expansion began in the 1500s. In this time, Europeans went farther abroad than they had ever gone before. They came into contact with many cultures that they had never encountered before, most of which were not white or Christian. This expansionist activity continued throughout what is known as the colonial period of European history, which lasted into the early 20th century. In the 17th and 18th centuries, scientists began to catalog and classify various types of fauna and flora, and this led to many, including the famed Carl Linnaeus, attempting to classify different types of human beings according to their supposed attributes. The emergence of pseudoscientific racial classification coincided, conveniently, with the establishment of the Atlantic slave trade, providing a convenient moralistic framework for the oppression and enslavement of others, who were viewed as less advanced or less human. Colonialism, social Darwinism, eugenics, and racial anthropology were all natural outgrowths of this hierarchical worldview. The concept of the white man's burden emerged in the 19th century, and is embodied in Rudyard Kipling's 1899 poem of the same name. The ideology offers a moral justification for the subjection of other groups by positing that we are civilizing less advanced people, bringing Christianity, technology, and social order and laws to groups that supposedly lack them. It casts Westerners, and therefore white individuals, as paternal figures towards the rest of the world, as though they were children in our care who must be guided and chastised. The essential assumption is that people of color lack the intellect, social structure, or religious morality necessary to reach the state of advancement achieved by Western civilizations. It also reframes the actions of the oppressors as carrying guardianship for their charges, rather than the self serving behaviors they have historically exhibited. In fact, this ideology goes so far as to claim that this is a terrible burden the white man must bear, but that it is his responsibility, whether viewed as God given or simply a moral imperative depending on the source. The paternalism is used to justify oppression, cruelty, subjugation, and exploitation under the guise of bringing advancement. Some even went so far as to say that native populations owed white people a debt of gratitude for all the blessings of civilization that they brought, despite the horrors that they inflicted. The argument was, and still is, that it was for the greater good. In fact, this ideology can be seen frequently today being held in ultra-conservative circles as not only the ultimate justification for what occurred, but also the reason why we have no obligation to make reparations or do anything to improve the social order that exists today. In fact, many today seem to yearn for a return to an era of European, American, and by default white domination. You see the rise of nationalism, isolationism, xenophobia, and racism across the world, but it seems especially intense in America and European countries. However, this prejudice is frequently reframed as being not racially based, but culturally based, as in Jordan Peterson, or technologically based, or based on the social order of the society. You can see all of these themes in Boyle's remarks during his speech in 2022. In his opening remarks, he says, "Yes, Europe is a garden. We have built a garden. Everything works." He follows this patently idolized remark with a series of self-congratulatory claims concerning the social, cultural, technological, and political superiority of Europe over the rest of the world. The comparison of the rest of the world to a jungle demeans the rest of the world. It paints it as inferior and reinforces the social hierarchy it wishes to claim. But it also echoes racist ideas that non white or non Western peoples were very primitive, living in jungles, caves, or huts. The idea that they had primitive technology, backward social orders, and blasphemous religions has long been one of the prime motivations, or at least excuses, for racism. The term jungle itself has long been part of racially charged language and accusations aimed predominantly at Black individuals. In recent years in the United States, during President Barack Obama's time in office between 2009 and 2017, there was a resurgence of derogatory terms publicly used and directed at Black people. One term frequently used by his critics and opponents was Jungle Boy, a highly derogatory label that predates the Civil War. In light of this history, Boyle's use of the term jungle to describe non-European, non-Western, and non-white civilizations is particularly apt as a contrast. He attempts to equate Europe with culture, order, technology, and civilization, and the rest of the world with barbarism, immorality, a lack of advancement, and a deficient social order. In this way, he creates a racialized geographic framework without relying on explicit racial terminology. In fact, in his analogy, he creates a false binary of Europe against the rest of the world, and he implants the idea that the rest of the world wants nothing more than to come and take the advancements that Europe has created. That their jealousy, along with their lack of advancement, is in itself a danger. This is another key feature of this sort of racial ideology, the idea that other peoples of the world hate us or jealous of us or want to take what we have because it's so much better than what they have. You see this kind of ideology echoed frequently today among leaders of MAGA and the ultra-conservative parties of the United Kingdom and Germany especially, but really all across Europe. But especially in the United States, conservative and alt-right leaders openly espouse the Great Replacement theory and ideologies that echo the concept of the white man's burden. Now, the Great Replacement theory is the idea that non-white peoples are attempting to come into whatever country you may be in, and they will attempt to replace the white population through job theft, violence, intermarriage, or whatever means are necessary. Much fear and fervor has been drummed up about this in recent years, although many stop short of actually naming it the Great Replacement theory. Rather than they talk about illegal immigrants and threats to national security and declining birth rates. However, there are those on the alt-right and in MAGA who openly admit that this is the Great Replacement theory that they are talking about, even as they try to justify it, dress it up, and make it sound better. Tucker Carlson, Charlie Kirk, Nick Fuentes, for example, have all espoused the Great Replacement theory, as well as elements of the white man's burden ideology. So we see that even those in very high political positions in Europe and America echo these ideas. They may dress them up in diplomatic terms that are more palatable to the majority of people with less extreme sounding language, but the central themes remain as ugly and dangerous today as ever.